Take a look at that ocean. Lots of surfers out today, and even a couple of fishermen, surf fishers, getting their surf fish. Really nice day. Hard to believe it's December. Well, let's get started. Today, I'm going to be reading the namesake chapter of Going Alone, called Going Alone. It's the heart of the thing. And let's just dive in, shall we? Okay, let me set this up in a nice angle so you guys can see the ocean nicely. Ooh, look at those waves. Not too much danger of getting hit by the, oh, that's so beautiful. Look at that guy cruising along on that wave. Oh, there's a reason they call this place Surf City. Okay, so let's just dive right in. Let's see if I can adjust the, I guess that's how it's gonna be. Here we go. All right. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to dive right in. Going alone. Discovering a universe without apparent meaning. And a quote. A major breakthrough of the scientific revolution, perhaps its greatest breakthrough, was to refute the intuition that the universe is saturated with purpose. That's a quote from Steven Pinker. And boy, I've run across that same sentiment in my reading a lot in recent years. It seems like it's a pretty common theme. Here we go. The great indifference is a perspective which yields an improved understanding of the apparent true nature of the universe. It is a place of clear thought and relentless truth. The way there is never easy, never marked, and can only be reached in solitude, and when the only chance of return is under the power of one's own volition. What you find there may be worth the journey, even if only you alone can understand or appreciate the prize. There is no road or trail to the great indifference, for followers must always lose their way. Strike out at once along the direction of your first inclination, and your own path will soon be discovered. Note what you find and do not find, as discovery alone is its own satisfaction. And whatever you later relate to others will fall like alien words upon ears plugged and deafened by fraternity, solidarity, and the warm comfort of common society. Only your fellow travelers in wildness might understand, though their own solitary venture may insulate their ears to whatever vain utterances you elect to voice. I recommend this way to those who are ready to lose, prepared to be wrong, and desirous of truth ahead of comfort, peace, or immortality. Come this way for the sake of virtue, for a sound mind, an even temper, a restful heart, and at last, an honest death. An end without hope of reward, reawakening, or revelation. A fixed point of terminus, punctuated upon the tail end of eternity, which is everything after the end of one's living. The vista of the great indifference will direct your gaze to your bruised, sore, and bleeding feet, which are the instruments of your arrival in that august place. The pain will grow intense with your notice, a gratifying reality. How sweet the moment of awakening, when the uncaring, corpse-like gaze of reality makes precious the breath of this moment and the next, without thought for any breath beyond, which is only a wishful potential vapor, nor the breaths already consumed, which have dispersed to mingle with the universal atoms, to never again return orbit round our fleeting mortal constitution. I would tell you the way to the great indifference if I truly thought I could, though if you go where I said it was found, then the telling would guarantee its absence. Go instead on your own, by your own motive force, along a way only you can see, alone and accepting of your solitude, aware you may never come back, and if you do, that you may never find words to adequately convey what you truly found. Okay, so that's the prose piece of the chapter. What follows after that is the typical notes from my muse section, which is the what I call the muse strikes. It's the bits of inspiration that came to me in the course of the 3 years that I was writing the book, where I just suddenly had words and I wrote them down, and for better to describe it, they just came out exactly the way they needed to, and they've never been edited. I'm so struck by this experience, whereas normal prose requires constant edits and revision. Even to this day, I'm still finding little bits that I want to tweak. I never, not once in 8 years that I've been working on this book, have I ever edited a single word of the muse strike piece, which is, you can identify it within the book because it's in the left justified italicized section. Only once, and that was actually, I have to correct myself, that was about 2 weeks ago. I saw a punctuation error where I should have put a capital letter, and I need to go back and make that fix. But that's the only thing in 8 years that I've never noticed that needed any editing at all in those a special section called Notes from My Muse. I'm going to go ahead and read the Notes from My Muse section now from the Going Alone chapter. The way that it works is that there's each little muse strike, and I would get these ideas just in the course of my life. I'd be at work, doing my thing, and suddenly the words would start forming in my head, and I'd have to grab a piece of paper and write it down. Or I would be out in the desert walking, and the same would happen, and I would type it up on my phone. Or even more interestingly, I would get it on my motorcycle while I was riding along, commuting back and forth to work, and I'd have to pull over at the nearest off-ramp to pull to the side of the road and capture the words. And what was interesting was that if it took too long, the words disappeared. They faded. They were like a lightning flash, bam, and it would illuminate the landscape, and then the light would dim really quickly and go away. That's what it's like with this. And I've read others' accounts of the same thing happening to them and how it fades. And my favorite example, and I've related it several times, was one author who described how that she would be out working in the fields with her father, and they were farmers, and the lightning strike of inspiration would come. She could see the patterns, and she described it like they were flowing across the landscape like the wind, and she would drop her tool that she was using on the field and run back to the house to get a piece of paper and a pencil so she could record the words before the wind, it blew away. That's exactly what the experience is like. This is the poetic feeling that I get, that I relate to the what people call the muse, right? That kind of a almost supernatural feeling, inspiration that comes. And I actually call it the muse in my book. I call my muse a dead muse. There's a chapter in here called My Muse is a Corpse. And I do that deliberately because I'm denying the idea that the muse is anything supernatural. It is simply the proper arrangement and seemingly conspiratorial organization of circumstance that allows my brain to produce something that is very specific and unique and topical without seemingly being driven that way. I call that my muse, my dead muse. My muse is a corpse. So that's another chapter though. So I'm going to read now the remaining section, and it's pretty long, one after another, one muse strike after another. And they're offset by little tilde marks between each section. You can't see that. So I will instead put in a little pause, a little pregnant pause between each section. When you hear me pausing like that, that means I'm moving on to the next one. Here we go, and it's kind of long, so I'm going to be walking around. I have to keep myself moving. Here we go. Notes from my muse. When I talk about going alone, some may think I'm referring to hiking or camping all by oneself. That's partially right, but mostly I'm referring to a mental endeavor to seek after and develop life principles without the reinforcing comfort of authority, dogma, or consensus. This doesn't require thinking up the ideas oneself, but instead using reason to discern if a proposition is true and fits with the reality of the world around us. That's going alone. It's only coincidence that being alone in very wild places is an excellent forum for rendering truth from the abundance of comforting propositions and stories we tell one another to keep back the dark. When you're alone in the dark, there's nowhere the truth can hide. So that's the end of the first muse strike. So the next one I'll little pause and then I'll continue, but I won't interrupt it with a narration anymore. I'll just carry on. And like I said, this is a long chapter, so let's see how far I can go. I can't promise I'll make it all the way to the end. I'll do my best. Might sit for just a sec. Emily and I lingered at the beach tonight until it was nearly dark. Just before we left, a middle-aged man arrived, limping badly and wearing nothing more than a swimsuit and a beach towel around his neck. He deposited the towel on a rock and limped with difficulty straight into the sea. Once in the cold water and free of his bad leg, he began swimming powerfully out to sea, diving under a few large waves before making it clear of the surf. We watched him swim straight and direct, further and further, as the night got darker and darker. We saw him swim past a family of dolphin, passing far beyond the last rocks, in water more than 50 feet deep. The man never veered his course or turned either up or down the coast, but kept straight for open ocean, swimming hard and fast. He must have been more than a quarter mile out when darkness overtook our efforts to follow. My last sight of the man was a single swing of his arm rising above the now black sea. I noticed the streetlights were on as Emily and I made our way back to the motorcycle, and I wondered if these would guide the man back to shore when he'd had enough of his solo nighttime winter ocean swim. I'm haunted by the desert now. The pull is powerful and relentless, like a vacuum drawing something to nothing. At the bookstore just now, I discovered a book titled Route 66 Ghost Towns. I eagerly read through the sections on the desert railroad communities of Essex, Amboy, Baghdad, Ludlow, Newberry Springs, and Daggett. The chapter ended with no mention of Siberia. It would seem I've made a very good choice in selecting Siberia as my adopted hometown. By this time tomorrow, I'll be in Siberia. I'll arrive about an hour before sundown, as temps begin to descend from midday highs around 110 degrees, 43 C. There are no ghosts in Siberia, though there is much that is dead. The void left by humanity passing away here has made room for possession by the wind, the heat and cold, and the steady progress of time. These things ignore my presence, though they'd appear different if I was not alone. I'd see only ruin and desolation with another. I'd see ghosts which were never there. I leave a thinning trail of connection with every mile I put between my life and the desert. This thread grows so slender that 100 miles out I dangle like a spider on a silk strand. The melodramatic abyss looms, a humorous caricature of nature. If only it weren't so real. I hang there for a day, in the wind and the sun, knowing the threat of exposure is nothing compared to the frailty of that one long, slender thread. The steep and rugged mountains of Japan never scared me. Even that time I ran from the mother boar, and again, several times when giant hornets swarmed to check me out. The mountains were far too civilized with life to offer any real threat. Not human life, but life itself. The mere fact that the landscape had a pulse, and a vibrant one at that, dissuaded my fear and alleviated my apprehension. Even to die in those remote, unpeopled mountains would be to pass in the embrace of what is both familiar and alive. The desert offers no such comfort. What lives there is sparse, mute, and still. There's little hum or buzz or grunt, just some howl from time to time, which carries lonesome sentiment and a desperate pleading. Even birdsong sings of solitude. The wind speaks loudest here, and the sun burns its case without respite from sunup to sundown. I fear the desert, even before I go. Just a little note and aside for this one. The howling that I just referred to, there's actually a video that a clip that I uploaded, a short, about the howling dog. That's where I got this idea from. So it's funny that I read this just now when I uploaded the clip. I encountered the howling dog earlier this week, so to speak. I'm halfway to Siberia and thinking of that long 100-mile thread I mentioned earlier today. Could it be that the thread actually originates out here? How alike the unthinking wastes of nature and the timeless non-existence before birth and after death. Oh, by the way, when I'm referring to like halfway to Siberia or things like that, that's because I would take my motorcycle and ride my motorcycle all the way out to Siberia. And it's a good long ride between Ludlow, maybe about 12, 14 miles, Ludlow and Siberia Ghost Town, and about 100 miles or more from my home to that place. During the night at Siberia, I left camp to wander alone over the desert in search of night things, nocturnal spiders and snakes, and the things which stare from the dark with glimmering eyes, and the stars which come out, and the moon in its time. The wind, too, enjoys the night, moving in warm gusts over the land, always inward, towards the deep center of the desert. While thus employed during my nighttime hike, I came upon that stone-lined footpath I had mentioned before. With nowhere better to go, I followed for a pace, minding the path's straight course from darkness into darkness, thinking over the mind, process, and hands which produced this way. What motive brought it about? What purpose did it serve? With every footstep here, long removed by the wind, only my own sense of allegiance, only my own senseless allegiance to precedence justifies a cause I can never know. That footpath is a little stone-lined path. I call it the path of wildness. In fact, even though I came up with the idea in Japan before I ever found this path, and it does indeed lead from nowhere to nowhere. If you go to Siberia Ghost Town, just go to the Ghost Town ruins and then head east, and you probably won't miss it. It's not far, maybe 100 meters east of the Ghost Town ruins. The desert is as sorry a companion for thought as it is for fraternity. I sometimes claim that my muse lives here, though this is a lie. Whatever sentience moves across the dark sands comes no further than the outskirts of my camp. I mistake its eyes reflected in my light for those of the fox who lived here first. Neither will come nearer than reflection, nor suggest more than aloof disinterest. The desert and the fox leave me to my own devices, to find thought and words on my own, caring for neither credit nor attribution. I think I'll take my shoes off. Maybe walk down by the water a little bit. That guy's getting some good waves right out there. I'll come back later and go for a swim when the sun's up a little higher. Okay. A nondescript slice of concrete in the desert marks the spot where a small island of gas pumps once stood. I discovered the remains of this old Route 66 service station by studying satellite imagery of the desert around the ghost town of Siberia. While exploring the site, my mind contrived the story of human ambition and loss here, which I suspect may bear more than fleeting resemblance to fact. And the ghosts I've borne in my mind for this place are now condemned to these ruins for the rest of my days. I discovered all that remains of the gas station and cafe at the California ghost town of Siberia. Sal and Ruth built this place in the 20s out of mortar and desert sand. The combination home and business had 2 gas pumps and a service garage with a maintenance pit. There was a separate door into the cafe which had wooden floors and where Ruth served her customers on fine decorated chinaware. When traffic on the old highway at last gave out, Ruth and Sal made the tough decision to leave their life's work behind to fall to ruin and fade into the desert, while the couple sought better fortune elsewhere. Today, nothing remains of the gas station and cafe but stone foundations on the outlines of lives now smothered in indifference. I further found the stairs which led into the abandoned roadside diner at Siberia, California. How many road-weary American pilgrims stepped up and through the door here for a half hour of relief from the trials of crossing the harsh desert in an unreliable jalopy, or miners coming in from the surrounding plains for a welcome taste of civilization and a home-cooked meal. How many would-be Californians, like my own great-grandfather, came here dreaming of a better life if they could only get across this cursed desert? Is it possible my great-granddad may actually have been here? Did he perhaps at one time step up these 2 steps to receive his first formal welcome into California after his long journey from Illinois? The places of rest were few at that time along this inhospitable stretch of America's Mother Road, making the odds he'd been here not unreasonable, nor very far-fetched. High desert temperatures today kept me near Siberia and far from the frontier where the great indifference doesn't loom. Why does it remain so far? Why can't it reclaim the ghost town in the same way as the nocturnal fox who haunts my camp, or the ruin which spoils every human artifact here? It seems human absence is not enough. All reminder must be gone. Say, the living pulse of a solitary individual, far off trail, far from any comfort or aid, which is the only companionship the great indifference may ever abide. I wonder if I'll sense this strange absence just before the light of my life winks out, when my body is far off trail, beyond any comfort or aid, when the dark frontier grows near and reality swells with dead promise. I suspect I will. I suspect that's how we all die, and the reason we cling so desperately to this wondrous thing of life. We sense that our living is something of a revolt, a strange and orderly uphill climb against the pull of universal disorder and chaos. The great indifference is that uncaring gravity well we hope to avoid by averting our eyes towards fellowship, love, and laughter, and by telling ourselves and one another comforting stories of reunion, reconciliation, and forgiveness. But the night doesn't care about our fear, nor the wind our chill, nor solitude our lonesome desperation. Better than stories is to face the night, stand in the wind, and embrace today the ones we love. Then, when we discover indifference looming with the intake of our final breath, we can close our eyes and smile peacefully at the inevitable reunion arrived at after a well-lived life. An early lunch in the Route 66 cemetery at the ghost town of Ludlow. Nearly all of the graves here are unnamed and assembled of scrap lumber and nails. Remembrance would be left to the imagination. Today's desert adventure did yield a very pleasant surprise. In my youth, My body could tolerate much heat and outdoor exertion with little impact besides a little weight loss and a propensity to go further than I should, resulting in many blind stumbles alone through darkened desert terrain after failing to find camp before sundown. Back then, I could go all day and into the night with little fatigue and rarely dissuaded from any wilderness goal. After returning to California from my life in Japan, I found my new desert adventures were commonly cut short due to sudden exhaustion and a quite unfamiliar accompanying sense of fear over my physical well-being. I chalked this new limit up to my advancing age and resigned myself to a fate of steadily diminishing horizons with each successive year. And then came today. Wow! My old self has seemingly returned. At dawn, I hiked a few miles out of the ghost town of Siberia, cautious of the summertime desert inferno I knew would soon arrive, and concerned my body might quickly give out with the heat, extreme exposure, and exertion. By the time I returned from this first hike, the heat was indeed on, and I'd greedily consumed all of my water before I arrived back at camp. I should have been redlined, but I was ready to go out again, and I did. After refilling my canteens, I struck out for round 2, and an even longer and harder hike. By the time I was back again, the day was hotter and the water was again no more, yet my body seemed ready to do it all over again. I held back though, not wanting to press too far into this surprising, rediscovered capability. It's 4:30 p.m. now, and the desert will soon begin to cool. I feel as lively and ready as I did at dawn, though the 8 liters of water which I've today drank and sweat away have left my exterior a sun-scorched, salty, dusty, and stinky mess, just like when I was young. How nice to meet my youthful self again out here in the summertime desert wastes. But don't worry, I won't be fooled. I'm 53, not 25. And no matter how good I may feel today, I must always respect my true age and my body's true condition. The desert around Siberia goes on tonight without me. Another dark passage of night like billions before and billions to come. My presence so brief and fleeting and irrelevant as to escape notice of something with no capacity to notice. Such futile ends, those delicious thoughts under the railway bridge. So meaningless to eternity, my vain attempts at virtue. Still I think, still I pursue virtue. For eternity was never mine, and relevance is found in each moment of common human connection. Let the universe go on and pursue whatever mindless ends it holds with the patience of an immortal. Time was never mine. Just these moments, just these words. The hot desert months protest my every ambition. Those far mountains, impossible. Those near hills, don't even think about it. A few days camping exposed upon the alluvium, maybe a day. Such dreams are reserved for winter, though even then I sense mute protest to my every solitary excursion. I previously believed that winter was the best season for desert hiking. Cold nights, snug in my good sleeping bag, warm, temperate days when I can walk for miles while drinking little and sweating less. But now I suspect summer has become my preferred time to hike in the desert. I'm not there for the walk after all, or the sights, or, heaven forbid, any companionship. My aim is the limits, which are much nearer and more distinct when the temperature is above 100 degrees or 30 degrees, 7 degrees C. A simple August walk a half mile from camp while the inferno burns and the landscape twists and shimmers with threat goes as deep as a 5-mile December excursion over black, barren peaks and through long, twisting valleys of stone. Though I can turn and see camp or the road or my motorcycle seemingly nearby under the summer sun, my mind presses such comforting thoughts aside with much concerned attention to my red, swelling hands, my nearly empty canteen, the total lack of any sheltering shade, and the onset of a woozy haze and dizziness, and faltering ability to see or think straight. Indifference looms then, surrounds, envelops, and ignores me, as only its nature and capability demand. My skin then threatens to dry and crisp, and my bones to bleach and break, as my folly and insignificance are held like twin gifts in hands held upright in the direction of safety. This is what I sought with such difficulty in the winter wilds. This is what I found so easily in the summer desert, within footsteps of my car, when only I had the foresight to go alone, knew better, and went anyway. Is it possible to will a place to become haunted? If so, then I suspect I succeeded this weekend during my visit to the desert ghost town of Siberia. The ghosts I made there are only as real as the emotions I used to create them. And they followed me away from that place when I returned home, and will haunt my memory for as long as I live or care to recall. The ghosts will die with me, just as the prior passing of the real persons whose hidden history is their secret inspiration. But such is the way of hauntings, to derive from hinted facts, to then grow and live by imagination, until the imaginer themselves becomes nothing more than a faint and shadowy impression, an indistinct suggestion of facts, a muse and inspiration to the imagination of generations to come. Go with a friend to discover something you share. Go alone to find something you may be unable to share. A stone wall is all that remains of the old railway station at Siberia. The stones which made up the wall were pulled by the builders from surrounding desert alluvium and represent well the long and diverse geologic history of the region. The stones include layered sedimentary rock formed when this place was the bottom of a shallow sea. There's pink rhyolite which flowed from a nearby volcano. One stone includes coarse breccia from an ancient landslide or waterfall, while still another is a lovely conglomerate formed at the bottom of a deep pool at the end of a long series of rapids, perhaps in the age of dinosaurs. Though the wall itself represents very recent events in human history, the stones and sands of which it is made tell a much older and more interesting story. This same story is told by the desert itself, if only we have eyes to see. Warming my hands by this small fire, the dark and vacant desert night crowds close with its silent depth. There's little fuel left, just a few small sticks from someone else who'd been here. Where are they now? There are no lights in the night. It seems I am truly alone. But that's always been the case. Even in a crowd, my flame, like the flame of all others, burns at the discretion of just my attendants. The fuel is not the matter. There's plenty of that. It's the attendance and the effort I make to pile on more fuel and stir the coals. But now my arms grow weak, as they've been doing for years, since about age 40, and my thoughts a little slow and stray, forgetful even to tend the fire. That's why it's become so small, just a dimming light in the infinite night. I'm tired now. It's time for a rest. I'll just lay down here on the soft sand. It's warm from the day which is already past, a comforting reminder of the life that was. I'll just close my eyes for a bit. The fire seems fine. I'm sure the coals will still be glowing at dawn. The night always ends well. That's always what I've said. I remember struggling over that ending, that last sentence. I struggled, that's when I actually struggled a little bit. That's always what I've said, and that's what I've always said. I didn't struggle with it at the time that I wrote it. I struggled with it in editing, and I ended up sticking with just the way it is, and I'm glad I did. As usual, the way the muse gives it to me is the way it should be. Walking in the mountains of Japan consumed my mind in direct proportion to the distance moved. If I walked 5 miles, then my mind was never further than that same distance. No place then was really very wild, even though I sometimes went where I suspect nobody'd ever been. Desert miles stretch all out of proportion to distance. 5 miles or 50 are to the same effect. Even 50 yards can do the job when conditions are right. Lately, it seems I don't even need to go. Just remembering the desert is becoming enough. That never happened with the mountains, or the sea, or with solitude alone. I'm tempted to think of the desert. I'm tempted to think the desert is coming for me, has me trapped in some way. But that's nonsense. Indifference doesn't care, is incapable of giving a damn. It's all in my mind. My vain attempt to hold on to what I've found, to gain some purchase in reality that might survive my passing. But the desert doesn't care, nor the mountains, nor solitude, though the desert voices this silence the loudest. That look on the old man's face, even though we were both at a crowded mall, surrounded by effervescent living, a warm summer evening, crowds of young people living. Did he see the indifference? Was that why his gaze went past everyone into nothing? I think he did. He doesn't need the desert. He's almost there. I wrote recently, just a few news strikes back, I wrote recently of tending a campfire. However, it's been years since I've actually built one. In fact, I've never built a fire in the desert since coming back to America. I prefer now to let darkness come on its own when I'm alone in the wild. I'll use a light to set up camp or a flame to cook my meal. But when the camp is set and my stomach is full, I'll switch off the light and sit alone in the vast darkness, almost like before. I asked myself today why my thoughts so often turn to death and the related subjects of emptiness, indifference, and oblivion. It's because I enjoy life, and I believe there's nothing to follow after we die. I believe that what waits after death is the same utter void we didn't know before we were born. I believe all this love and laughter, challenge and struggle, and the many opportunities to be and do good will pass away completely the instant our minds shut off and our being begins to dissolve away. I believe there will be no chance for reunion, reconciliation, or justice after our functions cease. And I believe that we will never again awaken to anything like what we are now, though our matter and energy may in fact be used by others. So if this is what I believe, then I guess it's no wonder I spend a lot of time thinking about and gazing into the void. No wonder I go to wild places. That's why I chose the desert, and the reason I always go alone. For whenever I return from such places or such thoughts, I always come back a better man, more sober and composed, less troubled by petty things, more engaged with my family, more at ease with who I am, better resolved towards being a good man, and more prepared for the absolute end I must very soon face alone. Just one more week until the start of the flash flood season in the California desert. Soon, my dark and silent nights in Siberia will come alive with thunder, lightning, and rain in the nearby Bristol Mountains. These summer storms create powerful and short-lived rivers which appear suddenly from nowhere to spill from canyons and dissipate across the broad alluvial plain where I sleep. The floods carry heavy sediment loads, of course, rock and sand, which are deposited atop the desert, adding new layers to a geologic story which began 34 million years ago. in a period when grasslands first appeared on Earth and rainforests retreated to the equator. The story goes on, year upon year, century after century, for countless millennia, with few observers and nobody to know the full tale. There are two types of swim into deep water. That's in quotation marks, swim into deep water. That comes from an earlier chapter where chapter called The Cast, where I describe the deep water wilderness as a part of the story. There are two types of swim into deep water that I enjoy in my life. The first is any solo adventure which stretches the bounds of safety and puts me beyond the easy reach of help. I enjoy these experiences for the impression of frail vulnerability I gain whenever I am alone with great indifference and have no friend or comfort to turn to. The second swim into deep water is when I find some way to honestly undermine my own beliefs or anything else which I think is true. Sadly, this is becoming less easy now that I've killed so much of my worldview and I'm left only with a handful of I don't knows. It seems there's little existential threat to admitted ignorance, though there's lots of discomfort if you don't like not knowing and find yourself all alone with your doubt. But then that's where the first and second types of deep water meet, and where we enter the very deep water, which I call the deep end of the ocean. The deep end of the ocean is where admitted ignorance and accepted indifference come together and cancel one another out. The very deep sea grows still here in the face of the fact that we don't really know the answer that we might previously have thought so sure, while simultaneously recognizing that the universe does not or is incapable of giving a damn about our troubling dilemma. I don't get to swim in deep water very often, as life has a way of sending rescuers to such places to quickly extract and return us back to work, or to our friends, or our family, our church, bar, shopping mall, television, or anything else that gives us comforting suckle, while reassuring us that we are right and, in fact, not alone. So, I'll take such swims as I can, and when I am able. And with a little luck, I'll one day drown out there, far to sea, alone with my doubt, beyond any savior, trembling within the dark and indifferent depths above, below, and everywhere all around. The most disturbing thing about being alone in the desert isn't what you might find there, but what you won't. The volcanoes of the eastern Mojave Desert are largely extinct due to the way in which they were formed. Each cinder cone and lava dome in this region had its origin deep within the Earth's upper mantle. This geologic story begins roughly 100 miles northeast of the intersection of the North American and Pacific crustal plates, which form the San Andreas Fault, where this fault crosses the San Bernardino Mountains at Cajon Pass. Though these plates are running laterally against one another, there is sufficient subduction of the Pacific plate to draw water-rich oceanic crust deep into the mantle below the North American plate. The introduction of water into the mantle at these depths lowers pressure such that large bubbles of hot magma form which begin to rise up and into the Earth's solid crust. It's essentially the same process which causes bubbles to form in a bottle of pop after the cap is opened. These bubbles of molten rock burn their way slowly through miles of solid rock as they rise towards the surface, cooling, changing, and growing smaller as they go. Tens of thousands of years later, the molten bubbles of magma arrive at the surface to pop as small, short-lived volcanoes, or simply to bulge through the surface without popping to form nicely symmetrical lava domes. While driving through the desert on Interstate 1540 or old Route 66, it's possible to see dozens of these extinct volcanoes and lava domes frozen at the moment of their death when the last of their molten magma cooled upon reaching the surface of the Earth. We can even gauge how long their journey was by the color and texture of the rocks, with dark volcanoes rising more quickly than light-colored volcanoes, which enjoyed a longer or slower trip from the molten mantle to the surface of the Earth. 48 hours until I leave again for Siberia. It's a swim into deep water out there at this time of year, even at night. A warm glide over unfathomed depths in every direction. Sometimes out there I distract myself with living. It's an easy trick which we learn from birth. But the game becomes so apparent the moment I falter in my play, like a man playing solitaire on a desert island who suddenly looks up and remembers his real situation. There are no conspirators when I'm alone out there in the deep desert. Nobody to help keep up the game. No one to share the illusion. None at all out there. If you don't enjoy criticism, then don't attempt to swim alone in the deep desert. If you don't like being wrong, then remain at home with your costly peace and certitude. I'd accept no something in exchange for my nothing. The desert took it all away from me, including the space where it all once belonged. Damn, that last one there really sums up the whole experience of coming to America and going alone as I did. That really does. The tide seems to be coming up. I arrived at Siberia minutes after sundown and had only a short amount of time to set up camp before the deep darkness enveloped the land. The only light or sound of humanity after nightfall here is the very rare passing of a vehicle on Route 66, or the commanding passage of a mile-long train moving up or down the Mojave Grade. The mountains to the south are 16 miles, 26 kilometers away. During summer thunderstorms, I sometimes see lightning in those mountains without hearing any sound of thunder. Silence and peace with every footstep and moment. Even now, the desert quiet is with me. This has nothing to do with the desert, really. Though without the deep desert, the spell might never have been broken. I used to worry that if I spent too much time alone out there, then I'd in some way never get back. Instead, what I found out there has seemingly become lost within me. It looks out through my eyes and sees the vast and terrible emptiness behind everything, reminding me to build and maintain sound principles of virtue, which are the tools and apparatus of a good and meaningful life. It hushes my mind with quiet when life rustles with demand, helping me to focus and attend to my responsibility as well as the true ends of virtue. I see the nothing which awaits after life is done, which fact compels me to act now in the name of virtue and the improved well-being of my fellows, as well as the well-being of those yet to come. I used to think I'd someday lose myself in the desert, though I never guessed I'd be lost until the desert indifference became lost in me. I just realized that's the second time that sentiment appears in this chapter. Interesting, I never spotted that before. "90-minute countdown to departure for Siberia. I wonder if that fear I always meet along the way is waiting now to ambush me. It usually lurks out past Ludlow, not far from Pisgah Crater on the right side of Route 66. When the fear comes, it always tracks me close beside the road, easily shadowing the big bike as I roll and glide through the black lava fields. In winter, it's dark already when I arrive, so I can't see, but I know it's there. In summer, like now, it seems to move steadily along among the rocks while waiting for nightfall, which approaches fast from the east. The fear does something to me about 3 miles from Siberia, where I always want to turn back. Haven't yet, but who knows tonight. Turning in onto the dirt road to the Siberia ruins, I've more important and real worries to attend to, as navigating a 600-pound motorcycle on a dirt road is very real fear enough to dispel any mere phantoms. Once I arrive and shut off the bike, the fear is gone. It wasn't like that the first or even the second time I went, when I cowered in the car with the doors locked, staring out at the dark. I felt like such a kid then. It's a wonder I went back. No more though. When the bike's engine stops, and the desert silence swarms in, all fear, every last bit, drains away. And thus it does. Have I arrived in Siberia? Or has Siberia arrived in me? And there you go. That's the third time that sentiment has shown up. Greetings from Siberia. It's dark now and big. This place is so big. As I sit here on the hot, dark sand, I think I figured something out. I know now why this place can't get me, why I'm not afraid here anymore, why the solitude and the night and the indifference can't take me away, though it's got me now and there's nowhere to run. It's because I'm connected, deeply connected, to my wife and my daughter and my brother and my mom, and to the others too. I try hard with my family, and I do a pretty good job, I think. Not so much the others. It's my failing, one of many. These connections, though, do the trick, I think. They keep me safe here, prevent my mind from wandering to places from which I might never return. In 1989, I left my girlfriend, now my wife, behind in a small college town near Oregon while I embarked on a great life adventure. I made it as far as the desert, in fact, not far from where I am now, just over the Bristol Mountains to the northwest, near the west shore of Soda Dry Lake. Something happened to me then which caused me to promptly return to Yumiko. I gave up the desert then. I knew I was about to go too far into the wild. Not physically, but that other way. I sensed then, quite rightly, that if I'd continued then, I'd never have made it back. I was right. I know that now. And I still know it now. Now I'm back in the desert, 28 years later. The same threat looms here like before. I can sense it, but I'm not afraid. It can't get me. I'm too strong now. Though my body is weak, my spirit, resolve, and hard-won maturity are more than a match for the great indifference. Not so in my youth. If I'd stayed, then I would surely have been consumed. I don't expect to remember life. That's all it is. Just that one line. Every swim into deep water comes at a price. The cost is the genuine quality of our connection with those we left behind. For as our universe expands without them, we find we've less to relate and have fewer common connections. That's why we so often choose society over solitude, institutions over independence, and the status quo of the strange and the unknown. Venture too far or long into the deep water and we risk losing sight of shore. The place where you swim then is very real. It just won't seem so to others. And the things you describe, well, perhaps it's better you just keep those things to yourself. Enjoy your society, relish your institutions, abide the status quo if it be good and just and a virtue. Just don't forget where you've been and what you've seen. At one point during my hike in the desert today, I took refuge from the heat under a bridge where Route 66 crosses a desert wash. I found a Japanese book under the bridge. The book describes a round-trip bicycle journey. Handwritten Japanese writing on the back of the book read, "I will not die far from home. I will make it back alive." Yumiko tells me the writing is a man's handwriting and the language in a style of the Kansai region of Japan. Oh, excuse me. My book should draw like vacuum and drain like death. I actually remember where I came up with that idea. I was remembering Emerson's comment in Self-Reliance. My book should smell of pines and hum with the sound of insects. My book, though, should draw like vacuum and drain like death. What would Emerson make of that? Take another with you if all you want is adventure. Life can pass easily this way. Though I suspect at times you'll wonder if there's more. There isn't, which is an awful fact. Quick, cover it up with distraction. Turn back to the comfort of friends. Clasp your hands in prayer. Keep yourself company with the sound of your own voice. Just don't go alone, unless you really want to see. Though I missed the mark yesterday in the desert, failed to disconnect, failed to become lost, I did, however, find trace of someone else's success. That Japanese man who left his book beneath the Route 66 bridge. The boldly scribbled note he left at the back of the book. There's no doubt he met the great indifference. It's not just in my mind, it's really not out there. I remember so clearly that sentiment and reading that book, and because that was just starting to get the idea of the great indifference at that time, and then to realize someone else at that same place had spotted and encountered and left a note. How weird and how curious that he left it there to be found by no one, yet nevertheless to be found by me. My goal from last weekend's hike was to safely explore how many hours I could hike into the day after sunrise and before things started to get dangerous. The answer is about 4 hours on a day when temps max out at around 110 degrees or 43 degrees C. But that was with 3 stops to rest under various flash flood bridges beneath the railroad tracks and Route 66. These stops were crucial to bringing my body temperature down, as there is absolutely no other shade in the open desert for use for this purpose. If I hadn't had those bridges to rest under, I think the hike could have been only 2 hours or less. I could literally feel my body temperature rising like a kettle on the stove while walking exposed to the direct sunlight. This was especially true after 9 a.m. The experience was rather alarming, and I definitely would not want to be caught an hour or more from camp during summer any time after 9 a.m. I must keep the summertime hiking to either nighttime or for just a few hours after dawn. A very good lesson learned. I found what's possibly another lost grave belonging to the desert ghost town of Siberia. The only reason I even guessed it's a grave is because it matches so well with graves I've seen at other ghost towns along Route 66. This collection of arranged stones is located just a short way out from where the town used to be. It's formed of hastily arranged stones and can seemingly serve no other useful purpose. Wooden crosses or headstones were commonly used on graves like this, though desert winds take their toll on such markers, and many graves I've seen are today missing their wooden markers and remain just a pile of outline of stones. I was a little delirious when with the heat when I found this, and I'm afraid I probably couldn't find it again if I tried. I'm following that mysterious stone-lined desert path which runs from nowhere to nowhere within the desert ghost town of Siberia. This path has become a companion of sorts for me whenever I come here, as I always seem to stumble upon it during my nighttime walks, and I still find new traces of it when I meander about in the morning drinking my coffee. Invariably, my mind always wonders about the hands which so carefully placed these. I wish I had the courage to write all the words. I'd have thought it would be easier way out here. Maybe after I lose sight of land. Maybe only after I lose the compass, after I toss the compass over the side. How curious that I wrote that, because I still feel that way. I still don't write all the words. But I'm getting closer. Maybe another 5 years. Route 66 camp at Siberia, California. It's summer now, and already I can feel the intensity of the sun as it crawls up slowly towards the horizon. The solar heat literally spills over the mountains before the sun can even be seen. It's like feeling the first trickle of a heat flood which is about to engulf the desert. I get a little anxious at this hour of the day, and I tend to work fast to break camp and ready the motorcycle for a hasty retreat. The radiant heat energy of the desert is astonishing, and there is absolutely nowhere to hide besides the shade under the railroad and highway bridges, which I sometimes share with birds and jackrabbits. It's no wonder most of the animal life here is nocturnal, hiding away from the sun at dawn just before the inferno switches on. Walking alone across the desert on a summer day can be a very lonesome experience. Where is everyone? Why are all the locals hiding? What do they know that I don't seem to grasp? Ready to depart Siberia, California. The night, by the way, that was a long pause, but there was really just, this is part of the same long section. Ready to depart Siberia, California. The night before was especially hot, only cooling to a comfortable level just before dawn. I ate my dinner while seated on the gravelly dirt, covered in sweat, wondering about male tarantulas which wander actively through the summer night looking for females. Though the wind was gentle this particular night, I did take precaution to lash the tent securely to the ground with pegs and ropes, and to angle the tent with a narrow side facing east and west, which align the tent perpendicularly to the night wind, which can sometimes rise suddenly to blow with great intensity for hours through the night. Desert night winds, unless due to a storm, nearly always blow into the desert, which means west to east at Siberia, which fact allows me to reliably prepare my tent to weather the blast should it come. The night here is quiet in every season, except the trains, which literally blast through the dark with deep rumbling engines, which shake the ground and resonant whistle blasts, which echo off the black volcanoes. The stars also remain constant in every season, even when the Bristol and Bullion Mountains to the north and south are being drenched in summer thunderstorms. The air overhead at Siberia is nearly always clear and clean all the way to the Milky Way. Just satellites mar the view, or an occasional jetliner, strangely silent, remind me of my species. It's a good thing, such solitude. So much is lost then, so little gained. A very equitable trade. Eventually, I won't need the desert, or the silence, or the stillness, or the atmosphere of peace. Maybe then I'll understand the reason Emerson wrote that the wise man stays at home. Yeah, I've definitely reached that point, for sure. That's why I have no interest in going back to Siberia, or anywhere for that matter. With today's outing, I was experimenting with how long I could remain exposed and moving out in the open desert on a day when temps would top out at around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 C. I learned that I don't want to be more than an hour away from shade after approximately 8 a.m. I could probably extend that range by wearing more and better quality clothing, as it seems it's really the exposure to direct sunlight which drives my body temperature up fast, rather than the simple fact of being outdoors. The sunlight hitting my exposed skin seems to transfer an astonishing amount of heat energy, which might otherwise be blocked or deflected by a sensible layer of clothing. I'm planning to research the desert clothing solutions in use by desert-dwelling peoples in places like Africa and the Middle East for some tips and tricks to help keep me safe. Another idea is to carry some form of easy-to-assemble shelter which I can quickly erect as a hiding place from the sun. I'm thinking perhaps of using a large reflective space blanket, secured to the ground with pegs and elevated with a short pole. For this journey, I was using the very nice shady areas beneath flash flood bridges, both along the railroad and Route 66. I'm certain I could easily spend an entire day under one of these bridges during even the hottest desert days. However, a smaller shelter, like my proposed space blanket tent, would likely offer far less cooling opportunity, and I'll need to experiment carefully with such options. as an extra caution, is the fact that since I'm on a motorcycle, there's no chance to escape the heat in a pinch by ducking into a car and to enjoy the air conditioning. This means that I must always plan to get back to my bike with enough exposure reserves, new term, to get the big GSA fired up safely down the dirt road from Siberia and out onto Route 66, where I can enjoy the moderately cooling effect of a 60 mile per hour wind. Altogether, I'm very satisfied with this experience, though I think the heat may have made me a bit delirious at times. I'm beginning to assemble some going alone best practices, suggestions for anyone interested in entering wildness alone in search of the great indifference. Of course, the first trick is knowing that you don't need to go to wildness to encounter indifference. You simply need to see past the thin veneer of meaning and illusory permanence we so expertly smear over everything and everyone around us. Yeah, but that's hard to see through. One, now here's a series, it's one after the other. 1, go alone, but return to someone you love. Reject all company in the wild. Reject even the desire to consult yourself. Let every new outing put yet another mile between you and everything that comforts and reassures your mind. With time, what you've left behind will be like a distant carnival of stimulation and distraction, a loud, brilliant spectacle of days leading to a fearful end few dare honestly consider or discuss. But beware going too far, too soon or too young, for it is possible to go too distant into wildness that you can never get back. Go so distant into wildness that you can never get back, even if you find your way back. 2, go alone, but find love in your life. Find a partner who will understand and who will be comfortable with you going alone to the wild. Someone to come back to. Someone who will leave a light on for you when you return and who will warm you with their embrace when you reach out longingly to hold them after you've returned. Someone to appreciate after you've seen what's not really out there. It's not necessary that this person share your interests in such solitude or understand your reasons. It's enough that they accept this part of who you are and do not dissuade your reasonable pursuit of going alone. So when dating, be upfront about this thing you do. Tell your potential partner about your practice of sometimes going alone. Mark the calendar with your scheduled outings and describe your plans. Consider wisely if this person cannot tolerate your solitude, your solitary bent and trajectory. Wow, that little boy's going out. Good for him. Let's see how he's going to make it through that shore pound. And I'm not done. I'm stopping midway in that last muse strike. But I got to see how this little boy does. You see him right there? Those are heavy waves for someone that small. Looks like he's going out with an older brother. Oh, there's another kid right there about the same age, just a little older. Riding the wave in. Okay, here you go. Go, 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 young guy. Young grommet. Watch out for those stingrays when you're standing on the sand. See how he gets through this wave. If you can duck dive through it, well. Oh, he goes over the top. He attempts to. His brother's making it out, or the older guy's making it out. No, there goes the third grommet. Grommet is young surfer. It's young surfer, slang for a young surfer. I think they're going to make it out just fine. Good for them. Okay, let's continue. Carrying on from what I was saying before, part 2. I'll include now a quote to illustrate my point about partnering with someone who can help us stay grounded, though I hesitate doing so for fear this quote may be misunderstood. I'm not adding this to suggest the poet should necessarily find a non-poet or more domestic soul to share their life with, but only to point out what others have observed, in which my own experience has borne witness. Let me share then a short passage from Nathaniel Hawthorne's extraordinary novel, my favorite book of all time, The House of the Seven Gables. In this particular section of the book, we learn about the platonic relationship between the old man Clifford and his young niece Phoebe. Clifford being of the poetic sort and someone lost to the world in a reality he can neither share nor make very clear, and Phoebe, a young woman of grounded sentiment, more buoyant of her youth, practicality, and common sense. Phoebe brings a peace and fulfillment to Clifford's life which is all out of proportion to anything he could offer the girl, though she does gain somewhat through the administration of her native charity and benevolence. The benefit of relations between the two is quite one-sided due to Clifford's advanced age and degraded mental prowess, though perhaps if he'd had someone like Phoebe in his youth, he might not have become so very lost, and she might too have gained from the unique qualities and gifts Clifford might have been in better position to share. They would in fact be a quite ideal couple had they not been simply separated by a generation. Here you go, here's the quote. This is from Nathaniel Hawthorne's The House of the Seven Gables, my favorite book of all time. In my list, in the back of my book, Going Alone, in all my books, there's a reading list. There's 18 books that I recommend anyone to read, especially if you're curious about the types of philosophical ideas I share in my books and my videos. Of course, you know, The House of the Seven Gables it's in there. It's like among the top 3, right? And it's in order. The books are ordered in the order in which I recommend them to be read. And The House of the Seven Gables is right up there early. Here it is, direct from the book. I'm going to try to do my best to emulate Nathaniel Hawthorne's, or to speak and be worthy of Nathaniel Hawthorne's incredible writing style. It's a snippet from the book. Now, Phoebe's presence made a home about her. That very sphere which the outcast, the prisoner, the potentate, the wretch beneath mankind, the wretch aside from it, or the wretch above it, instinctively pines after. A home. She was real. Holding her hand, you felt something, a tender something, a substance and a warm one. And so long as you should feel its grasp, soft as it was, you might be certain that your place was good in the whole sympathetic chain of human nature. The world was no longer a delusion. By looking a little further in this direction, we might suggest an explanation of the oft-suggested mystery. Why are poets so apt to choose their mates, not for any similarity of poetic endowment, but for qualities which might make the happiness of the rudest handicraftsman, as well as that of the ideal craftsman of the spirit? Because, probably, at his highest elevation, the poet needs no human intercourse. Bam, Going Alone right there. But he finds it dreary to descend and be a stranger. The whole thing's summed up right there. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. Number 3, I think. Yeah, no campfire. Let the night come on its own terms. Sit alone on the hard ground and let darkness arrive. Walk blind into the night, stumble and fall, and meet the fearful things you imagine are there. Return to your campsite both master and mastered. 4, no seat. Never bring any chair into the wild, nor create a seat. Just sweep away with your bare hand the large stones and sit on the ground, or in the sand, or on a rock, or better yet, stand and always move. 5, find a desert. Go someplace hard and empty. Avoid places with soft grass on the ground or green leafy trees for shade. Find someplace where no one goes. Find a place hot or cold or windy or bleak. A place where life isn't easy or welcome, where existence is hard, where you perceive threat in the empty. 6, no connectivity. Switch off the device and then never turn it back on. Or if your muse is catalyzed by sharing, then make the effort one way. Avoid checking or responding while in the wild, or better yet, ever. Avoid curating both your experience and your life. Seven, no books. You know better. Leave the books at home. Though bring blank pages and a pencil or your blog. Do these things if you discover your muse meets you there in the wastes. Listen and record what you hear then. Don't be embarrassed to share, though you'll likely be looked and thought of as increasingly odd if you do so honestly. 8, and final one. Consider death at first light. Greet the dawn by imagining your own death and the deaths of your loved ones, and the eternity of utter empty to follow for each of you. Imagine that you'll never again see the ones you love, nor they you. Never again experience any thought or emotion. Ask yourself how you should best spend the coming day, cognizant of how few days really remain, and how much you will very soon utterly lose when this life is done. I'm gearing up now for today's ride and overnight at Siberia. The temperature forecast is 109 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 C and 113 for tomorrow. I always lose more in the desert than I gain. I wonder how much less there'll be of me after I return. I wonder what part of me will evaporate away today and tomorrow in the heat and empty. I have a home. I have a wife, I have a daughter, and I have an extended family. And I have a place called Siberia. It's someplace that reminds me that the universe doesn't care. It's a place that threatens without acknowledging my presence. Its silence deafens my every hope and ambition. I become almost nothing here, for a night and then a day, before I go back to my wife and my daughter and my family and my life. And I resolve then to make purpose and meaning where there is none. To identify virtue and make it my friend, and to vow allegiance to what is true, and to deny what is false, and to live a good life, a life of meaning, a life of love, a life well lived. I'm embarking on my first ever solo night hike in the desert. It's dark out there, and I've no reliable way to find my way. Back to the ghost town, without lights or any sign of life. I won't go far this time, just until I can no longer touch bottom. The temperature today was around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 C, with a gentle yet very hot wind blowing in from the west. It's hard to describe well the emptiness out here at night, with just my little pen light providing a dull haze of illumination in an ocean of black. The locomotives do thunder through from time to time, yet they seem as indifferent to my meek presence here as the night and the heat. I think it's their steel rails which insulate the occupants from the fearful reality which swims here in the night. A lot of me evaporated away into the hot desert night during this hike. I'm discovering that the stuff that goes wasn't necessary anyway. Each time I go to the desert, I return with less. And I'm a better man for the loss. More deliberate, more sincere, less distracted, lighter in every way. The desert quiet is everywhere with me now. Everything slower. Silence deep within the mind. Desert skies offer little impediment to elevated thought. Without clouds or much insulating humanity between the earth and the vacuum of space, my thinking floats easily up and away from whatever might otherwise restrain and constrain upon the firm bedrock of convention. If I float my ideas high enough, I can no longer make out the ground. Everything becomes a vast landscape of indifference. There's little difference in any direction. Even the deep dark above yawns awesome and deep. A similar infinity below towards the ground and around me on every side. I'm increasingly mute, whenever I return. There seems little reason to share what I can barely find words to describe. There'll be just a sliver of moon 2 days hence when I arrive at Siberia. The moon will hang low in the west just after I arrive at sunset. Within 2 hours, this faint source of light will pass over the horizon, leaving deep night until dawn. A darkness not even the abundant starlight can awaken. I'll walk then alone into the desert, a flashlight to guide the way, all inner light exhausted through a force of will to fit in. I'm at the edge of the desert now. Terrible heat, awful really. I've been exposed now for hours. So much has been drained from me. I'm counting the remaining hours now to sunset, anticipating some relief after the sun goes down. I like life this way. I enjoy looking over the awful edge of oblivion. After 9 months and 4 attempts, I was at last able yesterday to get a San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputy to the desert location where I discovered what I thought were human bones. 3 deputies agreed, and the bones are now on their way to the coroner. Have you ever smelled the odor of a rock? This is something I've only ever experienced in the deep East Mojave Desert, in the low, crumbling ruins of the ancient Bristol and Bullion Mountains, among the island peaks of the Old Dad and Old Woman Mountains, and at the rugged and exposed feet of the Great Providence and Granite Mountains. The smell of stone here can only be detected during the hottest days of summer, and only just after sundown, when the faint twilight grows and a swell of gratitude emerges that we've survived yet another inferno day. The exposed stones here are the ancient product of a collision of continents, white, red, and black in color, rich in silicon and iron. It's the iron we can seemingly smell. It's the same odor of our own fresh and copious blood, the taste of a bloody nose. Something about the long, hot day and the sudden cessation of heat when the sun goes down appears to draw this same faint odor from the stones, from the landscape itself. It's a beautiful smell while it lasts, strangely familiar, wildly unexpected, as exotic and evocative as a rare perfume. Don't expect this aroma of iron from the forest or the sea or the desert sands. It's a product of bare and exposed and ancient desert mountains, a factor of deep heat and sudden cooling and the relief of survival and the promise of night and the chance of another day. I often like to compare my desert outings to a swim in the sea. In wintertime, a walk into the desert is like a leisurely swim into deep water from a calm and serene shoreline. It isn't until you're very far out that it dawns on you how deep, black, and cold the water below is, and how distant the shimmering shore. In summertime, though, a walk into the desert is like playing in the surf on a day when heavy winds and waves pound upon the shore. There's trepidation from the first step, and danger even before we're over our heads in apparent depth. Summer is like a storm upon the desert, a raging tempest of heat which drives nearly all life to the cover of shade, or to flee altogether until the storm's autumn end. To swim, then, is to risk death in short order, to drown in the heat, to die with bulging eyes and swollen tongue, stumbling naked towards the shimmering mirage, to become parched and bleached bones upon the sand. The winter desert kills with cold indifference. Its cool, daylight silence lures us too far from where we should turn back. The comfort is a vain illusion. Just a little further. I'll go just past that ridge. The atmosphere is so mild and comforting at mid-afternoon. The sunset coming on. Shall I stop and watch? Nightfall. The onset of sudden, deep cold. Which way back? No lights, no trail, no guide. A final evening. The start of an endless night. There was a storm raging all about me during today's hike, invisible for the clear, clean atmosphere, the dead air, and the deceptive desert silence, yet apparent in my beet red face, detectable in the real and rising anxiety of my fast words and the growing delirium evident in my odd topics of conversation and the distracted nature of my discourse with the camera. I had been exposed in the open sun in temperatures of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 C, for over 2 hours, and the heat stress was really beginning to take its toll. I remember thinking, while I walked to hide under a Route 66 bridge, how I was perhaps getting near to someplace bad with regard to my bodily condition, getting close to someplace I shouldn't want to go. Yet curiosity urged me to continue just a little further when I soon left the shelter of the bridge, to inch just a bit nearer the edge of heat stroke and the one-way vista beyond. There's something deeply satisfying about tempting danger in this way. I suspect it's the same feeling others get when they drive very fast or swim with sharks or climb without ropes. A deep invigoration and appreciation of life which comes of every near miss of life's final and utterly conclusive end. The season of heat is passing. Temperatures today in the eastern Mojave Desert won't climb past 100 degrees or 38 C until mid-afternoon. A mild day by recent standards. Soon the sun will relent its terrible onslaught of energy upon the land, not by nature of diminished output, but only through the gradual shortening of days and the indirect angle of attack. I can already feel the coming change, anticipate the cooler evenings and the crisp bite of midnight cold, which is herald of the much deeper and colder winter nights to come. There isn't much time between seasons here, barely a chance to rest a moment and prepare for the next season's atmosphere and inclination. Spring and autumn are bliss here, though the memory and forecast of what was and what's to come dull all but the most senseless immediate regard. Age 53, and my mental faculties are both optimally tuned and failing fast. The experience of operating this system is like piloting an airplane through a range of mountains I can't possibly summit. With each passing year of life, the canyons narrow and the valleys rise. There's no going back, and time's running out ahead. I better do my thinking now before this journey will very soon ends as a smoldering stain upon a high alpine cliff. And that's the talk which seems to trouble people when I bring it up. But it's very interesting thoughts to me. There's great virtue in self-destruction. By this I do not mean self-harm or injury in any way to our well-being or our innate sense of happiness. In fact, I seek to increase these greatly, to rarefy goodness, to find more immediate and sound answers to life's most challenging issues and questions. I do this through destruction, self-destruction to be exact. I attempt this destruction daily, usually in the morning, just before sunrise. I do this by throwing everything of real value upon the fire. Not a scrap of sentiment should remain. I start the fire with a sincere question. Are these things true? I then heap on the fuel of criticism, blow the flames with puffs of objectivity, lay on abundant dry honesty, and then watch the new day's inferno rage. What's left in the embers are the little bits of truth I carry for another day. These are my treasures now, not those combustible ideas of dogma, tradition, and authority. I've burned them down again, and I will again tomorrow and the day after that. My secret goal is to one day have nothing left to burn, to be forced to go a day in utter doubt and confusion. Oh, what a blessing to walk in the company of an ignorance hard-earned of education and lost utterly to fearless, naked doubt. I used to be afraid of the desert for impractical reasons. I was afraid of the dark and the solitude and the questions which lurked there. these fears have largely passed. Now I'm afraid of more practical things, like the heat and the cold and the risk of going very far while very alone. But also, there's a new and very different fear that's rising. I began to sense it just recently, perhaps truly during the last outing 2 weeks back. It's the sense of the perception of a pathway emerging before me, an invisible route of my own making, a way opening up which I know I'll follow. I don't fear this direction for any reason other than that I know the passage is one way and utterly irrevocable. Wow, that was a real forecast because I've been on that new path for a couple of years now. It is new, irrevocable, utterly, but very good. Oh, that must be the papa coming back. Wait, where did surfboard go? Oh no, he's no surfboard. I guess he was just body surfing. Oh no, that's not the papa. 48 hours till Siberia. I'll arrive half an hour after sunset. It'll be dark then. I'm thinking perhaps I'll leave the motorcycle at the ghost town ruins and night hike immediately after I arrive. Instead of packing the motorcycle with camping gear, I'll prepare my 3-day tactical bag and wear it while riding all the way out to the desert. This is easy to do as I can simply loosen the pack's shoulder strap and allow the bike's pillion seat to carry the pack's full weight. This way, when I arrive, I simply get off the bike, tighten the straps, and start walking into the dark. For this hike, I'll go perhaps a mile north from Siberia into the near edge of the deep water wilderness. This will be my first real overnight in the desert and away from the reassuring touch of civilization in over 3 decades. A homecoming of sorts. The last time I did a desert night hike like this, I was very young. I remember that night well. I remember emerging from my tent deep in the night to admire the rising moon. I remember the warm, empty promise of the desert night wind. I still feel it now. I can remember this. I can still visualize the whole thing in my mind right now. I remember feeling so small and frail, standing naked and barefoot on the sand in the vast and empty night, the great dark desert illuminated with faint, pale moonlight, the only man on earth, it seemed. It's possible my nihilism can be traced to this moment or moments like this. There were many then. I wonder how my much older mind will react to this same experience 48 hours from now. Things are very different now. I'm a family man now. I have solid life objectives now. I have sound principles now. I have deeply meaningful purpose. I have deeply meaningful purpose now. I know and recognize the great indifference now. I don't fear the empty. Death is a wondrous, perhaps utterly final mystery to me now. I no longer pretend I've outthought death's mystery, and I no longer pledge allegiance to any comforting story of forever. I now instead await and welcome whatever strange, wondrous, or terrible reality really awaits. I think I'm ready for whatever I'll now find or not find in the night. There's always lightning here during the summer at night in Siberia, in the east and in the north. Ever seen, never heard. There was an enormous dust storm racing across the desert towards me. I was scrambling to get set up and secure my tent before the storm arrived. The initial winds were intense, nearly knocking the tent flat before blotting out the remaining sun and ushering in the start of a long, hot, gritty night. The dust storm hit my desert camp before I could finish pounding in the last tent stakes, flapping the loose tent madly while minute particles of the dust began clouding the sky and irritating my eyes. The wind blew hard for several hours at the start of night while I alternated resting and walking about the dark camp. It was too hot to remain in the tent, too windy to cook a meal or relax, too soon for sleep. The wind eventually stopped. The dust passed or settled into the dark. The stars came out. Still too hot to sleep. I bound the tent flap open to invite in the night breeze as well as scorpions, tarantula, and snakes. I lay naked upon the floor of the tent. Nothing to sleep on or covering me, just the soft, hot sand below and the dehydrating hot wind above. blowing heat all about me and over every inch of my body. I slept then. Not well, not deep. Night thoughts rose in my mind between dream and consciousness. I tended these like a small, fragile flame when I could, when my mind rose far enough from sleep to realize I was thinking. I let all those quiet night thoughts go. I can't remember a one now. They were ghosts in the night. I'm awake now. It's another hour before dawn. The morning wind woke me with a long and sudden blast of heat. I expect this is how the desert anticipates the summer day to come, an anxiety of mindless, natural force. The desert around me is so dark and empty. Only the wind, my companion, and the stars, a distant, mute audience. This night I'll always remember. A fitting candidate for the someday smile on an old man's face. My grandchildren wondering, why does Granddad smile that way? Sweat and life evaporate equally out here. The lull and comfort of civilization and companionship dull my perception of life's immediate passing. The tick of seconds will never get back. We will never get back. Don't think such thoughts. Here, amuse yourself with the TV or watch a movie. How about a meal or a drink or a chat with friends? There's no such distraction out here. Just the locomotive's determined passing, blind to anything other than their rails. Can't help sense time's passage here. Feel the very real weight of age. My muscles seem to fade with each step. That distant peak, possible yesterday, impossible today, not even a dream tomorrow. Each moment, less and less. It didn't escape my notice that the desert dust storm I encountered 2 nights back encompassed the deep water wilderness, which is up and beyond over the mountain. Before the wind and sand swallowed me up where I camped on the gently sloping alluvial plain near Siberia, I watched as the storm front passed quickly across the edge of deep water 1 mile to the north of my camp. This means the dust storm swept up and through first the twisting red canyons of deep water and then along the craggy black volcanic mountains leading to the heart of the desolate Bristol Range. From within those mountains, someone would never see such a storm approaching. The experience of such a sandstorm within the mountains would be both sudden and overwhelming. Immediately prior, the air would be still, the sky would be clear, the desert as silent as always, and then suddenly a brown wall and wave of wind would appear over the ridge and up the canyon. Anyone walking or setting up camp there would be consumed in seconds by wind and sand, left standing or hunkering against the sandblast gale, eyes covered by hands, mouth tight, mind racing. And as these storms often come at twilight, the person caught so exposed would also be subject to sudden nightfall as the sand snuffs out the setting sun, ushering in a long, harsh twilight. I wonder how often the desert explorers and miners of old encountered such storms. The only story I've read of such an event relates to a 100-year-old tale of an old miner who was caught suddenly by a sandstorm in the same general area where I was camping 2 nights back. In fact, he was a few miles southeast at the edge of the Amboy Crater lava field, attempting the long walk from Baghdad to 29 Palms, where he would attempt to sell the various items he collected from the mines. He was an old man and got by any way he could. I suspect the sandstorm he met rose up from the same dry lake bed where my storm was born. The miner was overwhelmed by the storm just as I was and sought shelter in a lava tube, while I found refuge in a tent. While waiting out the wind and sand, he discovered large chunks of gold in the lava. The story goes that he took enough gold to fill a Bull Durham bag, with plans to return for the rest. Sadly, the old miner was dead within 24 hours of his return to Baghdad, and the gold he brought back was used to pay his funeral expense. I expect these sandstorms have been a feature of the desert here for tens of thousands of years. Now that I know of them and know what to look for and expect, I'll anticipate the day I'm once again suddenly enveloped in a long, blustery, gritty night of blowing sand and howling wind. I'll relish the chance and prepare my mind for the opportunity. 4 weeks back, and my overnight at Siberia was a brutal affair. The ground had absorbed a great deal of energy from sunlight, which it then radiated into the cooling night air from sundown until well past midnight. Sleep was very difficult then, as sweat pooled on the bottom of my tent, and I tossed and turned until 3 a.m. I rose at dawn, thoroughly dehydrated and fully sapped of all energy. The prospect of facing sunrise and the broiling day to come was daunting then, and I hastily broke camp in favor of a full retreat to my cool and comfortable home on the coast. 2 weeks later, on August 14th, 11th that is, and the story was different. Temperatures were 5 degrees cooler, and the earth was losing its collected daytime heat fast after sundown. This was due to an unexpected sandstorm which rose suddenly at dusk, with winds that seemingly drained the earth of heat before the long summer twilight was complete. I slept better then, save for the clamor of wind rattling my tent and the grid of sand blowing in through open flaps, as well as the bite of some desert creepy crawly which clambered into bed with me from the dark. When I awoke the next day at dawn, the planet was in halcyon spirits, and I wondered if summer had somehow gone. The air temperature was cool, and atmosphere refreshingly clear after the long night of blowing sand. I stepped out of my tent into pale light beneath a still ebony sky. The stars were gone in anticipation of the dawn. Day and night hung then in perfect balance. My fear of the desert was gone then too. I even contemplated the 1-mile hike to the edge of deep water. The desert had fooled me. Not deliberately, of course. There's far too much indifference here to support any malice. I was fooled by circumstance and the natural confluence of events and the quality and character of that particular morning's climate and my own foolish trust of a clockwork universe of ever-descending consequence. I was slow to break camp then. I lured myself to complicit peace in a quiet and settled attitude. Suddenly, the heat returned with force. It was about 30 minutes after those beams first touched my skin after sunlight spilled over the Bristol Mountains. I felt my internal temperature begin to rise, rising faster than sweat could control. Besides, I was thoroughly dehydrated from the dry heat night wind. There wasn't enough moisture in me to mount an effective thermal defense. I was losing the battle even before it really began. A little panic then, a little haste. I broke camp quickly and was on my motorcycle and moving along Route 66 in no time. That felt good. I was keeping the rising desert heat at bay through the wind of my ride and the false sense of safety that our contraptions sometimes provide. I stopped the bike once to admire a distant bahia, and another time to cast a melancholy glance at the nothing that was once the ghost town of Baghdad. Neither time did I get off the bike. Neither time did I stop the engine. Too much risk in either action. Just keep moving. Forget about the heat. About 10 miles from my camp at Siberia, I saw the low black profile of the volcanic cinder cone called Amboy Crater, and my route began taking me past the crater's miles of hardened black lava. This is a particularly hot place, hotter than the surrounding desert. This is due to the black rocks which absorb heat to such an extent that you cannot touch them with bare skin, and which radiate this heat all day and night in great waves upon the land. This area is one of the origin places for the great winds which drive the sandstorms here, an origin place for many indifferent desert things. On a whim, I decided to pull into Amboy Crater at the Bureau of Land Management's narrow, one-lane paved road leading into the National Monument. I knew there were covered picnic tables by the trailhead, which is the start of the 2-mile walk to the crater summit. I thought I'd rest a bit in the shade, ready myself for the long 200-mile ride home to the coast. I awoke an hour later to utter silence, the same midsummer daytime silence which speaks such volumes in the desert. There was nobody around when I had arrived. Nobody came while I lay nearly naked on the concrete in the shade. Ants climbed all over my body, displaying the same open indifference I know so well here. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, which squinted bloodshot and red, still stinging from the night's blowing sand. Why do I do this? I asked myself. Why do I come to such places? No answer was needed. The silence was answer enough. I didn't think anything more, though I did write a short bit of prose then. I've copied it below. It's about the heat and the cold, the twin killers, as I called them. Here's what I wrote. There's an invisible killer prowling the entirety of the desert on a schedule both predictable and unposted. It swallows everyone and everything at once and begins squeezing until we're either dead or its time for departure has come. It will come again tomorrow, a little sooner or later depending on the season. One reason few people remain in the desert is the dawning awareness that arises here that no legacy or memory can stay intact in such a hostile and dangerous place. Everything dies in the desert. Everything fades to dust and sand. Nothing remains or returns like it was before. Elsewhere, in more mild climes, the fact of our growing and extending circles of family and friends and the seeming permanence of what we've made or done in our lives lead us to believe that the results of our life efforts will last and maybe even survive for a while beyond our own passing. We imagine our life's work will stand for a time as a humble monument to our brief existence here. We are comforted we won't soon be forgotten, that after death our name won't quickly become disconnected from the individual we once were, that anonymity will not sweep over us as it does every man and every woman and every child who was and who no longer is, that we won't at last become nothing more than a fading name scratched along with some dates onto cut stone in a graveyard of forgotten someone's. Old age and death are less fearful then, as we fooled ourselves that our works will last for a while upon the earth, while our spirit will then go on to exist forever in heaven or hell. Such a curious equanimity, such a deceitful peace. Deserts offer no such peace. Deserts remind us that we are just sand and wind and heat, animated for a while, alive for just another day. They inform us that we have no soul. They tell us that death is no more than a return to the nothing we were so long before life. And deserts say these things without words, speaking facts through mute and stark example, caring not if we listen or comprehend, incapable of caring even. Emptiness, their final and first and final word. This is why few who come remain long in the desert. This is why we come and then so quickly go. There's only so much we can take of such place. Only so much we can stand before we run back to our loved ones, return to those who share our myths and stories and tales and promise of comfort, permanence, and peace. To tell ourselves that what we've begun to suspect out in the desert isn't really true. To hold our hands to our ears and close our eyes. To speak reassuring words of forever. To talk of final reunion and final reconciliation and final justice. To speak again of forever and then again. To talk of someday mansions in the clouds and a just lawgiver who will love us forever and of joy to last for eternity. Excuse me. We leave the desert to escape the denial of such comfort. We leave the desert to forget the sand, to forget the silence and the heat and the empty and the utter indifference of a universe that truly does not seem to care. And the awesome implication these discovered facts suggest may be true. The peaceful corridors of the mind. I'll walk there now and again later. From time to time, so quiet, more silent even than the desert at night. Not even the sound of crickets. Is that guy okay? Oh, he's just stretching. Tonight will be the first evening in Siberia this summer when the temperatures will be already below 100 degrees or 38 C. I want to be there then. I want to walk alone towards the darkening desert mountains there. I want to watch while the killer makes its evening retreat to the east. I haven't yet made a long nighttime excursion and overnight into the deep water near my ghost town home of Siberia. My reason is the fearful summertime heat which returns so soon after sunrise, and my knowing reluctance to wake in the morning far from the feigned safety of my motorcycle, and the necessity of hiking so far back while the desert killer begins stalking in from the east. Twice in the past, the killer nearly got me. Once, 2 years back. Another time, 3 decades before that, when I was young, strong, and a very real danger to myself. The last time the desert almost caught me, I had foolishly lingered too long in the vicinity of deep water and was nearly taken as I attempted a hasty, hi little bird, and somewhat panicked escape across and over a barren landscape of slippery, decomposed granite. As I jogged along and through the craggy, rolling landscape, I worried that the loose rock would twist an ankle and leave me crippled and exposed to the coming killer. That experience was foolish, and the fear that I felt then was very real and well earned. I almost think I spotted death moving towards me then, rather near, from the north, from the deep end of the desert sea, wavering and flickering in the dry heat haze, a terrible mirage caught up in my panicked breathing, drawn to my hot, pounding pulse, not breath. Before that, many decades before, I'd left my little red truck by the road on a late summer morning in the Panamint Valley. Without water or a hat or any protection at all, I'd decided to hike it to a distant sand dune. So far, yet apparently so near. I turned back to It's interesting to note how the fearful things of my ordinary life refuse to accompany or follow me into the desert. Worries about money, career, or reputation drop away as I ride my motorcycle into the wastes. It's as though these things can find no purchase or footing in a place where their concerns have no relevance. Or perhaps it's simply because these worries become mean and petty in the face of the more real and permanent truths I encounter in their stead. Like the rich man who spills coins from his hands when he looks up to find the executioner at the door, or the businessman who abandons all and runs ahead of an approaching plague, or the well-known figure who chooses loved ones over adulation while lying upon his deathbed. The curious thing is the way There are several ways to become lost in a desert. Only the most fortunate are never found. Even if they return to community, home, and loved ones, they are never found. Even if they live long into a ripe old age, they are never found. Even if a subtle old age, they are never found. Even if a subtle smile graces their countenance. Thank you for joining me for this disjointed book reading. It looks like the connection's no more. I see there's some comments there, but I'm unable to read them. I do apologize. It's just the light is too blinding. Thank you for joining me. I'll try again another time to get the whole chapter through. Take care. Bye-bye. Be safe, but not too safe.